Hi guys, I'm Blackie and welcome back to the channel. Today, in the continuing story of the forgotten bushcraft knife, we're going to deal with a real icon, the Buck 110. Now for 50 plus years, the Buck 110 was the knife when I was young coming up. The guys got them for Christmas. I got given one once or twice by various girlfriends for birthdays and special occasions and things like that. The knives were just that iconic. And it was the woodsman's knife. It was the farm knife. It was the tradesman, the construction, the guy that was doing carpentry, the plumber. Everybody had one of these black belt pouches hanging on their belt, and you knew it was a Buck 110. It was just the knife. That knife is so iconic in use in the various tradesmen outdoors and stuff. Deer hunting. You saw these used for gutting deer, gutting big game. It was common to see in Sports Field and other outdoor magazines the picture of the guy sitting there with his bloody hand, you know, cutting the hide off of some big trophy animal or something like that. That knife right there, the brass bolsters on the end and that dark wood with that broad back to it was just iconic for the time period, and rightly so. This was meant from the ground up to be a working man's knife. This wasn't no little pokey bait show knife, you know, to pull out for your friends to impress them how fancy and glitzy it is. This was a working knife. That handle was big, a lot bigger than standard knives, and in a later video I'll show you like the Granddaddy Barlow and stuff like that, which were very thin and are very easy to carry, but they don't have the backbone and the strength of this knife. Those big, thick bolsters kept that blade lock solid, so when you were working it and having to turn and twist and cut, like in our woodscraft, bushcraft, it wouldn't come loose. It took a lot. It would eventually, anything mechanical, but it stayed a lot better, had a lot more staying power where the blade didn't get loose and wobble in it. And I saw a lot of these just worn, slam out. You would think as many of these that were the Father's Day present, the Christmas present for all the boys, the boyfriend present, the giving away at the church function, the auction at the Mason's Lodge. These knives were everywhere. And you would think that you'd walk into a pawn shop and it'd be full of wore out versions of these. You'd be wrong. Before the days of eBay, it was hard to find one of these things, because when you got it, you used it till it was wore out. It was batoned. It was used for cutting up PVC pipe. I've seen that, where it would be used for shaving off the rough ends and things like that. I have seen a ton of these that look like a jigsaw blade, where they had pieces broken out of the blade where they'd bear down because they popped slag in welding with it. It was a tool. And part of that was because of how tough the steel was. Now, 10 plus, 12 plus years ago, something like that, Buck changed the steel. The steel that was in this design back when I knew it, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, was super, super hard Rockwell. They used to do a demonstration. For you old silver wolves, you're going to remember this. Every year at Christmas, Sears and Roebuck, and guys, that was the store. That was the one all us kids waited for, that big old Christmas catalog to show up to go through the toys section and the clothes and everything else, and the knives and things like that for those hunters and woodsmen and stuff. That was the catalog. And we had a Sears and Roebuck in Dothan, Alabama, which was about 40 miles from me, and every year there'd be the pilgrimage down there in late November or early December doing Christmas shopping. And usually those 2 or 3 weeks around Christmas, you had vendors that would put up displays and do special things inside the store. And I can clearly remember a Buck display where a buck person who didn't work for Sears, they worked for Buck Knives. And they were demonstrating the buck knife, and they'd take a buck 110 and they would take a hammer and cut 16 penny nails with it and show you that the knife wasn't damaged because it was so hard it would cut mild steel. Now, for those old silver wolves that are out there listening to me, you know what comes next. Once you ever got that sucker dull, oh my God. We didn't have diamond hones back in my day. All we had was just plain old Arkansas stones. And you would just all day trying to get an edge back on it because it was so hard that when it ever did get dull, sharpening it was super, super difficult. And as I've said in earlier videos, I got an A in auto mechanics in my high school. And I think I worked on a car 3 times. The rest of the time, where was I? I was in the classroom, adjacent to the bay with all the cars, sharpening buck knives. Because the instructor had a collection of buck knives and he couldn't sharpen them. And I knew how. And so, about 3 days into the class, he found out. I pulled out a buck 110 like this. And he felt of it and saw how sharp it was because I had to cut something. And he wanted that knife off of me, and I traded it off of him because I had my other knife that I will never trade. But I had the buck 10 I was using off my belt. Yes, in school we could carry knives back in them days, guys. And he was so impressed with how sharp it was, he asked me could I sharpen his. And I said yeah. And the next day I brought my gear in, I went into class and I sharpened 4 or 5 knives. And he brought more and brought more. And he had bought this big display collection. It used to be this big fan thing, you know, you'd sell to a gun shop or something that had one of every buck knife. And there were a couple of hundred buck knives. You know, like 150, 200 types of knives. And none of them were sharp because it was to go on that display, see. He wanted them sharp. And so I spent that year sharpening buck knives and got an A in a class for auto mechanics sharpening knives because these were hard to sharpen. Now today we have diamond hones. Plus they changed the steel on this. But I read an article a couple of years ago that said you can still contact Buck and they have a custom shop where you can get a Buck 110 with like actual stag handles or silver bolsters or things. Now you're going to pay a premium, but they will do that, and they still have that hardened steel that I remember that held an edge so well. They still have those blades, or they still make those blades, but it's not in the standard knife. You got to request it. So that might be something you want to look in. I think it was American Frontiersman a couple of years ago, and that magazine was talking about how a guy had gone to the Buck, written to Buck, and had one like I'm talking about made with actual sandbar stag handles and nickel steel bolsters instead of brass. But back to the thing. As a woodsman's knife, a camp knife, a cutting knife, the knife that you use for all your field trials, the Buck 110. Look how broad that is. Now that is 1 inch from there to there. So we're talking it's a ½ inch thick. The curve to it, so it fits the palm of the hand, and since it's big, it doesn't wear blisters. Everything is rounded, see. This was a knife that's going to be in the hand of somebody, not for just 30 seconds, but maybe a couple of hours cutting up fish, gutting and cleaning a big animal, things like that. Cutting, trimming, as like I said, pipe or stuff like that. This was a working man's knife, and it was a big hand-filling grip. Reinforced, a good solid lock that locked it solidly in place. And you closed it like that. I teach people the way you open a knife is you grip it and you come out opposite direction. Then you let go of this hand. When you close it, you grab the blade, then you shift this hand down, squeeze, and close it. And move them fingers out of the way like that. See? So again, push it in the back, break it, and then shift your fingers out of the way, and then push that down. That way you're never going to close it up on your hand. How many of these have you seen that beat the snot out of because they were using it to dry thumbtacks or whatever, or they just had to do something? I've seen them with duct tape. I've seen them with everything. This was the knife, guys. For my 50 years of being in the woods, I saw more of these knives than any other, to be honest. Fishing, hunting, whatever. A lot of times when the guys would go deer hunting or whatever, this is what's riding on their belt in that leather sheath. It was just common to see these leather sheaths wore out. I mean, stretched out of shape, seams torn out where they'd used it and abused it in their daytime job and etc. But these knives served both in the field and in the city. And so this was the knife. So, as far as our woodscraft, bushcraft, these knives have a good design for us. One, like I said, that great big broad smooth handle, so it doesn't rub hot spots. Two, it does not have a 90-degree spine on it, so you're not going to be able to strike off of this unless you take a file and put a 90-degree spine on it. And that's something I would recommend. Take it and tap it down into a soft wooden block and then take a file and draw file that back until you create a 90-degree spine. Now this back false edge right here, you could use that as a scraper. It'd be easy to take a file and sharpen that and leave this rounded back here. That way you could choke up and use, see, just the tip for fine precision work. Okay? Now, let's do a simple project right quick. Thing that's used for God knows how many 100 years. A pot hook. Something to hang on a fire. Now let's talk about that geometry for just a second. A long, and what this is, this was a tree limb like this where this one went off. You're going to cut it off and turn it off, and that becomes the hook to hook on. But where are you going to put the notch to capture the bail of the pot? If you put it on this side, the outside of it, the geometry wants to do this. It wants to swing it further in and make it want to come off that way. See? But if I put the pot hook to the inside, underneath that hook, when I put it on, it wants to do this and turn that stick that way. If I put it to the outside, it turns the stick this way, see? So how the stick balance, after you've cut your stick, always put it on a fingertip and hold it out here and see how it balances. See, also, that limb ain't straight. It curves that way slightly. So that means that when I hook it, it's going to also want to do this. So if I put it to the outside, it'd want to do that. We don't want that. So I'm going to look at it and let it balance. See where the balance point is. Say right about there. And what direction I want to put that notch. I'm going to put it directly underneath. And instead of doing it like this, which is straight to the pole, I'm going to cut that notch this way so it balances correctly. So right about there and right at the angle I want, I'm going to take that and I'm going to put me a line right there to cut down to. Now, let's put it up against a tree and let's cut it. Okay. Forgive me for forgetting to turn the dang camera on. What we're talking about is you take your hook, and of course this is a limb that was growing like this, and this was a branch coming off. I cut it off above and below. Now it's got a natural curve to it. So straighten that up. I want to hang it on my thumb and see where the natural balance point is. And then I'm going to get on the inside, like I said. If you go to the outside, it wants to do that. If you go to the inside, it wants to curve it, make it hook tighter. So I always hook to the inside of the curve. Next, I have taken it and I have begun notching it. Now all I did was put it against my chest, put it up against here, and I started cutting down with my knife to it. And then when I got down there close, like that, I bear down and cut off the leaves that I've made. I'm pushing up just like feather stick leaves. And then I cut it off, just like that. This creates the pot hook. that you see right there, where it's actually underhooked. So that line will set in there. The bail will actually set in, and there's a little bit lip to the front to keep it from falling out. And I want to make sure this is wide enough across there for the wire or bail of my pot to actually fully seat. So I may need to open this up a little bit when I actually get the pot on it to make sure it's going to fit properly. But you see how that's a lip right there. And now it will balance better. Again, guys, sorry, I went and moved the camera over there, and when I came out the door this morning, here it is, the end of July. When I came out the door this morning at 6 a.m., it was 86 degrees with 80-something% humidity at 6 a.m. And here it is about 9 a.m., so it's over 100 with heat index right now. And it's just hot and muggy and miserable, and I just flat, when I turned the camera off and I moved it over there, I forgot to hit the go button. I'm very sorry. But we still managed to do it. As I showed you, I took it to the inside. Again, you cut off a limb. This is the main trunk. Cut it off. Turn it over. I want it to hang on it. When it's hanging there, if I put the notch to the outside, it wants to do this. Unhook itself. So I put the notch to the inside. But here's the part they always forget to point out to you. Put it in hanging on your thumb and hang it out there and see. So this has got a natural curve to it. I want my notch to be 90 degrees to this, not 90 degrees to this. If I do that, my notch is offside and wants to camp my pot. So I want my pot to hang flat. So I hang it up there, and now I look and make sure that this notch is now 90 degrees this way to this. Instead of, because that limb's coming out, it's actually a crooked. When I hold it up straight, you'll see that notch is actually crooked off to one side because I'm compensating for that crook. But, as you saw, the Buck 110 served just fine. Haven't hurt anything with that. Now, I did nick myself. How did Blackie do it? That back edge is actually a little sharp on Blackie's. That false edge is a little sharper than the factory was. I took the time to put a little bit on it, and you can even see a little bit of my blood right there on it. So she bit me just a little bit, but that's okay. Now, that means I can take that back and shave bark. See? And that's what I modified it for. Just forgot I'd modified mine for that. So for shaving bark and getting rid of it, making pot hooks, I recommend you get rid of the bark. Because bark is bacteria. And you don't want any risk of that falling into your pot while you're cooking. So peel the bark off. Make a bare wood pot hook. So, the Buck 110 can still serve today as a bushcraft knife. For those of you that want to go lighter, and I've had a lot of people tell me, Blackie, I don't like a big belt knife. I'm kind of intimidated by a big belt knife. Understand that. Then a smaller knife will suit you better, because ultimately it is your choice in how you use a knife that works. And I've known masters with a Buck 110 that could clean anything, that could make anything. Just give them time. They'll whittle it, carve it, slice it, split it, do something with it. And the Buck 110 was their knife of choice. For 50 plus years, it's been the woodsman's knife, the working man's knife. And it still serves well today. Now they make this same design, but with a lighter synthetic handle. I cannot speak to that. I have never had one and used one, but I can speak to the old tried and true brass, weighs a ton, so to speak. And there's a reason it's that strong, because it's that much metal. It holds it for those prying actions. And if you're looking for a bushcraft knife that's a folding knife, the Buck 110 would be a really, really good choice. Hope you've enjoyed this, guys. Please leave any questions or comments below. And tell me about your experiences with the Buck 110. I'm sure a lot of you have them. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.